The surface of the ocean moves with rhythm. Waves rise and fall. Light breaks through the water in rays that shimmer and fade. Everything you see is familiar, measured, knowable. But that familiarity is a kind of blindness. Beneath the visible world is another realm entirely. Not another ocean, but the same ocean transformed. The water grows darker as you descend. Not slowly at first, then suddenly, then completely. The pressure increases with every meter. Not gently, but constantly, without pause, without mercy. At a certain depth, the rules change. Physics behaves differently. Life takes forms you cannot predict. The ground itself splits open into chasms that drop farther than mountains rise. These are the trenches, the deepest wounds in the ocean floor. And at their bottom lies a place where almost nothing human has ever reached. A place where the weight of the entire ocean presses down. Where darkness is not the absence of light, but the presence of something else. Where cold remains constant and food arrives only by chance. This is not a place designed for visitors. It is not a place that welcomes exploration. It is a place that simply exists, indifferent to observation, governed by forces that do not negotiate. The deepest habitat on Earth sits more than 6,000 meters below the surface. Deeper in some places, nearly 11,000 meters at the very bottom. If you could stack 20 tall buildings on top of each other, they would still be underwater. If you could send light downward, it would vanish long before reaching the floor. If you could place your hand there, the pressure would compress it instantly. But you cannot go there. Not as you are. Not without protection that even our best machines struggle to provide. This habitat has a name. Scientists call it the Hadal Zone, named after Hades, the ancient realm of the underworld. The name fits, not because the place is evil, but because it exists beyond the reach of the familiar world. Separate, isolated, almost unreachable, and yet it is part of the same ocean you can touch with your hand at the beach. The same water that laps against the shore. The same substance, just transformed by depth into something else entirely. Tonight we descend into that transformation. Not quickly, not with certainty, but slowly, with questions that deepen as the water grows darker. Welcome to Info Jungle. If you enjoy calm, thoughtful documentaries about the natural world, consider subscribing. These videos are created to help you relax while learning at a gentle pace. The shape of descent. Most people imagine the ocean as layers stacked neatly on top of each other. Sunlight zone, twilight zone, midnight zone, and then the bottom. The picture is tidy, easy to understand, but it simplifies something more complex. The ocean does have zones, but they do not transition cleanly. They blur into each other. Each zone defined not by sharp boundaries, but by gradual changes in light, temperature, and pressure. Near the surface, sunlight penetrates easily. You can see clearly for dozens of meters. The water feels warm. Life is abundant. Fish move in schools. Plants sway with currents. As you descend past 50 meters, the light begins to weaken. Colors fade. Red disappears first, then orange, then yellow, until only blue remains. At 100 meters, the brightness dims noticeably. the world takes on a narrower range of tone. Shapes flatten, details blur. By 200 meters, natural light becomes too faint for most purposes. You would need artificial illumination to see clearly. The temperature drops. The pressure increases. This is where the ocean begins to feel different. Not hostile yet, but unfamiliar. At 1,000 meters, sunlight vanishes completely. You enter the midnight zone, a place where darkness becomes permanent, where the only light comes from living creatures that produce their own glow. These creatures use bioluminescence for hunting, hiding, and signaling. Their lights flicker like distant stars in an endless night. But the glow is faint, just enough to suggest movement, not enough to illuminate the surroundings. The temperature at this depth stays near freezing. The pressure reaches 100 times what you feel at the surface. Every square inch of any object experiences the weight of a car pressing down. Machines built from metal can handle this, but they must be designed carefully. Thick walls, reinforced seals, tested materials. Even with these precautions, equipment fails. A small crack becomes a catastrophic weakness. A minor flaw leads to implosion. This is still not the deepest part of the ocean. The midnight zone extends from 1,000 meters to 4,000 meters. Below that lies the abyssal zone. And below that, the Hadal zone begins. The Hadal zone starts at 6,000 meters. It extends downward to nearly 11,000 meters in the deepest trenches. This zone exists only in narrow places where the ocean floor splits open. Unlike the layers above it, which stretch across vast areas, the Hadal zone appears in isolated pockets. Long trenches carved by tectonic forces. Steep walls. Narrow floors. Complex terrain. These trenches do not form a continuous environment. They are scattered around the world, separated by thousands of kilometers of shallower ocean. Each trench functions like an island, isolated, distinct, difficult to reach. The pressure in the Hadal zone exceeds 600 atmospheres. At the deepest point, it reaches more than 1,000 atmospheres. That means every square inch of surface experiences more than 8 tons of force. To imagine this clearly, picture holding a bowling ball in your hand. It feels heavy. Now imagine 100 bowling balls stacked on that same hand. The weight becomes impossible to support. Even materials that seem indestructible on land buckle under this force. Steel bends. Glass shatters. Seals crack. Engineers spend years designing equipment that can survive these conditions. They use titanium alloys. They shape hulls into spheres to distribute pressure evenly. They test every component in pressure chambers before deployment. But even with perfect engineering, vehicles can only spend a few hours at Hadal depths. Batteries drain quickly. Systems strain under the load. Every moment at the bottom adds stress. The weight of water. Water is heavy. This seems obvious, but the scale of that weight becomes difficult to grasp at depth. At the surface, you feel the weight of the atmosphere pressing down. About 15 pounds per square inch. You do not notice it because your body is adapted to this pressure. Your cells maintain equilibrium. Your organs function normally. But water is much denser than air. For every 10 meters you descend, you add another atmosphere of pressure. At 10 meters, the pressure doubles. At 20 meters, it triples. At 100 meters, it multiplies by 11. The progression feels aggressive when you think about it carefully. Each meter adds more weight. The force builds without pause. By the time you reach 6,000 meters, the pressure has increased 600 times. At 11,000 meters, it exceeds 1,000 times surface pressure. This weight does not press only from above. It presses from all directions equally. Water surrounds objects completely. The force is uniform, constant, inescapable. Human bodies cannot tolerate this pressure. Not even for a moment. Lungs would collapse. Bones would fracture. Tissues would compress. Even animals adapted to moderate depths cannot survive in the Hadal zone. Fish from shallow waters die instantly if brought too deep. Their swim bladders implode. Their tissues fail. Only creatures specifically evolved for these conditions can function at the bottom of the trenches. And even they cannot survive if brought to the surface. The pressure change destroys them just as quickly. This creates a paradox for scientists. To study Hadal organisms, they must bring them to the surface. But bringing them to the surface kills them. Researchers have developed pressure-retaining containers. These devices lock at depth, preserving the pressure inside. The container acts like a portable section of the deep ocean. But these containers are complex. They require precise seals. Any flaw causes failure. And even when they work perfectly, they can only hold small samples. The weight of water also affects how machines behave. Thrusters designed for shallow water lose efficiency at depth. The dense water resists movement. Motors must work harder. Energy drains faster. Navigation becomes more difficult because dense water transmits sound differently. Sonar pulses travel faster. Echoes return more quickly. But they also scatter more easily off irregular surfaces. Interpreting sonar data at Hadal depths requires experience. A reflection might come from a rock wall or from suspended sediment. The machine must distinguish between solid surfaces and transient features. This becomes critical when navigating narrow trenches. A miscalculation could send a vehicle into a slope. A misinterpreted echo could lead to a collision. The weight of water shapes everything in the Hadal zone. It influences geology. It constrains biology. It limits technology. And it never relents. Distance and scale. The Hadal zone is far from shore. Not just in physical distance, but in accessibility. Most trenches lie in remote parts of the ocean. The Mariana Trench sits in the western Pacific. The Tonga Trench lies east of Australia. The Peru-Chile Trench runs along South America's western coast. Reaching these locations requires research ships capable of long voyages. These ships must carry deep-sea equipment, support crews, and supplies for weeks at sea. Even after reaching the location, conditions must be favorable. Weather delays missions. Storms make deployment dangerous. High winds prevent safe lowering of equipment. A research team might travel for days, only to wait for calm seas. When the weather finally clears, they may have only a narrow window for diving. Once a vehicle descends, it takes hours to reach the bottom. The descent is slow and controlled. Too fast and the machine risks damage. Too slow and battery power drains unnecessarily. After reaching the seafloor, the vehicle has limited time to operate. A few hours at most. Sometimes less. During this brief window, Researchers must navigate, map terrain, collect samples, and record data. Every task competes for battery power. Every decision affects what information returns to the surface. Then the ascent begins. Another journey lasting hours. The vehicle rises slowly, adjusting for changing pressure. By the time it reaches the surface, an entire day may have passed. And the data collected covers only a small area. Perhaps a few hundred meters of seafloor. Perhaps less. To put this in perspective, a single trench can extend for hundreds of kilometers. The Mariana Trench alone stretches more than 2,000 kilometers. Most of it has never been observed directly. The scale of unexplored territory is staggering. Imagine trying to understand a mountain range by examining only a few scattered clearings. That is the current state of Hadal exploration. Each dive provides a glimpse, a small window into a vast environment. But the windows remain far apart. This distance creates gaps in understanding. Scientists can observe patterns in one location, but they cannot confirm whether those patterns extend elsewhere. A species found in one trench might exist in others, or it might be unique to that single location. Without visiting every trench repeatedly, the question remains open. The isolation of trenches compounds this problem. Because they are separated by vast stretches of shallower ocean, organisms cannot easily migrate between them. Each trench becomes its own evolutionary laboratory. Species adapt to local conditions. Small differences accumulate over generations. Genetic studies confirm this isolation. Populations separated by relatively short distances show significant divergence. They share common ancestors but have evolved independently. This means the Hadal zone likely contains far more diversity than current estimates suggest. Each trench may host unique species. Each basin within a trench may contain distinct populations. But documenting this diversity requires repeated visits to each location. And the resources needed for such missions remain limited. The distance between what we know and what remains unknown continues to grow. Not because knowledge decreases, but because each discovery reveals more complexity. The Hadal zone is not one environment. It is many environments, each separated by distance, each shaped by isolation, each containing secrets that technology has barely begun to touch. On land, you understand pressure through experience. You feel the weight of objects. You know how materials respond to force. You can predict when something will break. This intuition develops from constant exposure. Every action teaches you about the physical world. Lifting, pushing, building, breaking. But that intuition stops working at Hadal depths. The pressure there exceeds anything you encounter in daily life. By such a margin that comparison becomes meaningless. You cannot scale up from familiar experiences. You cannot multiply the pressure of deep swimming by some factor and understand the trenches. The gap is too wide. Engineers who design Hadal vehicles face this constantly. Materials that perform predictably on land behave differently under extreme compression. Metals that seem rigid become slightly elastic. Seals that work perfectly in tests fail at depth. Joints that move smoothly at the surface stiffen or jam. The changes are subtle but critical. A seal that compresses 1 millimeter too much allows water to enter. Water entering a pressure housing means instant failure of electronics. Instant failure means the mission ends. The vehicle must surface immediately. Testing helps, but testing cannot replicate every condition. Pressure chambers simulate the force, but not the cold. Cold water tanks provide temperature, but not the pressure. Combining both requires specialized facilities. Few institutions have access to them. Even when equipment passes every test, the real ocean still provides surprises. A component rated for 1,000 atmospheres might fail at 900. Not because the rating was wrong, but because the ocean introduces variables that tests cannot capture. Corrosion, sediment infiltration, unexpected vibrations, chemical reactions between materials and seawater. Each dive becomes an experiment. Engineers learn what works only by trying, and sometimes failing. The absence of light. Darkness in the Hadal zone is not like darkness on land. On land, darkness is temporary. You wait for sunrise. You turn on a light. Your eyes adjust to moonlight or starlight. Even in a cave, you carry the memory of light. You know it exists somewhere above you. But in the Hadal zone, light does not exist. It has never existed there. It cannot reach there. The ocean absorbs every wavelength long before it descends 6,000 meters. Infrared vanishes first, then red, then orange, yellow, green. Blue penetrates deepest, but still fades completely by 1,000 meters. Below that, nothing. Not dim light. Not faint light. Not the possibility of light. Just absence. This darkness has persisted for as long as the trenches have existed. Millions of years. Possibly longer. No sunrise has ever illuminated the Hadal floor. No moonlight has ever reflected off Hadal sediments. No starlight has ever reached those depths. Organisms that live there have never experienced light. Not in their lifetimes. Not in their ancestors' lifetimes. Not in thousands of generations. Evolution shapes them accordingly. Many Hadal fish have no eyes. Or they have eyes so reduced they serve no visual purpose. Just small light-sensing organs that detect faint bioluminescence. Without eyes, their bodies allocate resources elsewhere. Better chemical sensors. More sensitive pressure detectors. Enhanced ability to feel vibrations. The darkness changes how organisms interact. On land, predators rely on vision. They watch for movement. They track with their eyes. They strike what they can see. In the Hadal zone, predation happens through other senses. A predator detects the faint pressure wave created by a swimming organism. It follows the chemical trail left by decaying matter. It waits motionless until prey contacts its sensory appendages. Hunting becomes slower, more patient, less energetic. Prey cannot hide by staying still, because stillness does not prevent detection. They must avoid creating any disturbance at all. Any movement through water creates vibrations. Any metabolic process releases chemicals. The darkness also affects how machines operate. Cameras need artificial light. But artificial light changes the environment. It reveals organisms that would otherwise remain hidden. It alters behavior. Some creatures move toward the light. Others flee from it. Neither response represents natural behavior. Researchers must account for this. They cannot observe the Hadal zone as it naturally exists. They can only observe how it responds to their presence. This introduces uncertainty into every observation. Is a creature moving slowly because it normally moves slowly, or because the light disturbs it? Does a species avoid certain areas naturally, or does it avoid those areas only when vehicles are present? The questions multiply, and many remain unanswered. Temperature and stillness. Near the surface, water temperature changes with seasons. It changes with weather. It changes throughout the day. These fluctuations shape how organisms live. Migration patterns follow temperature gradients. Breeding cycles align with warm months. Metabolic rates increase with heat. But in the Hadal zone, temperature remains constant, just above freezing. Always. Not because of seasons or weather, but because sunlight never reaches there. And geothermal heat from the seafloor provides only minimal warmth. The water temperature might be 2 degrees Celsius, or 3. It varies slightly between trenches, but within each trench, it stays remarkably stable. This stability changes how life functions. Organisms do not experience seasons. They do not prepare for winter or wait for summer. Their internal rhythms disconnect from external cycles. Reproduction might happen continuously, or it might follow patterns based on food availability, or on internal biological clocks that evolved over millions of years. But not on temperature. The cold also slows chemical reactions. Metabolism operates at reduced rates. Growth happens slowly. Healing takes longer. Energy processes become more efficient out of necessity. Organisms must extract maximum value from minimal food. They cannot afford waste. Every calorie matters when the next meal might not arrive for weeks. This creates bodies built for endurance rather than speed. Muscles contain fibers optimized for sustained effort, not bursts of power. Tissues store energy in forms that release slowly. Systems operate at the minimum level needed to sustain life. The stillness of Hadal water reinforces this pattern. Near the surface, currents move constantly. Waves create turbulence. Wind generates motion. Tides shift water masses. But at Hadal depths, water movement nearly stops. Currents exist, but they flow slowly. So slowly that particles suspended in the water drift rather than tumble. Sediments settle without disturbance. This stillness affects how organisms navigate. Without current to indicate direction, they rely on other cues. Chemical gradients, pressure variations, geological features. But these cues provide less information than surface organisms receive. A fish in shallow water uses current, light angle, temperature change, and visual landmarks. A fish in the Hadal zone has access to far fewer signals. Navigation becomes more difficult. Finding food requires more time. Locating mates demands more effort. The stillness also affects sediment. In shallow water, currents constantly redistribute sediment. Sand shifts. Mud resuspends. The seafloor changes shape. But in trenches, sediment accumulates slowly and stays in place. Layers build up over centuries without disturbance. This creates a geological record. Each layer represents a period of time. Deeper layers are older. Scientists can extract cores from Hadal sediments. These cores reveal information about past ocean conditions. Chemical composition, organic content, particle size. But extracting these cores requires specialized equipment. The drill must penetrate compacted sediment under extreme pressure. The core must remain intact during ascent. Any disturbance scrambles the layers. Few cores have been successfully retrieved from Hadal depths. Each one provides valuable data, but the data remains fragmentary. The architecture of trenches. Trenches do not resemble anything most people picture as ocean floor. The seafloor in many places is flat. Abyssal plains stretch for thousands of kilometers without significant elevation change. They are among the flattest surfaces on Earth. But trenches are different. They form where tectonic plates collide. One plate slides beneath another. This process, called subduction, creates a long, narrow depression. The shape is not uniform. Some trenches have steep walls that drop quickly. Others slope gradually. Some contain terraces and steps. Others plunge in a single continuous descent. The floor of a trench is rarely flat. It contains ridges, basins, fault lines, collapsed sections. These features create complex terrain. A vehicle descending into a trench cannot simply go straight down. It must navigate around obstacles. It must avoid steep slopes where landing would be unstable. It must find areas where the seafloor can support its weight. Sediment distribution adds another layer of complexity. In some areas, soft mud accumulates to depths of several meters. In others, exposed rock provides a hard surface. The transition between these areas can happen within meters. A vehicle landing on soft sediment risks sinking. Its weight compresses the mud. If the sediment is too soft, the vehicle cannot stabilize. It tips, or it sinks too deep to function properly. But landing on hard rock presents different challenges. The impact must be controlled carefully. Too hard, and equipment sustains damage. Sensors crack. Sampling tools bend. Engineers design landing gear that adapts to multiple surfaces. Wide pads distribute weight on soft sediment. Shock absorbers cushion impact on hard surfaces. But the design cannot anticipate every possibility. Sometimes sediment appears firm but collapses under weight. Sometimes a rock surface is covered by a thin layer of mud. The vehicle thinks it has found solid ground but breaks through. These surprises complicate missions. Trench walls present additional hazards. In some trenches, walls slope at 45 degrees or steeper. Loose material clings to these slopes. Small vibrations can trigger slides. When a vehicle uses thrusters near a wall, the water movement dislodges sediment. The sediment cascades down. If the vehicle is below the slide, it gets buried. Even small amounts of sediment can cause problems. Sediment entering thruster vents reduces propulsion. Sediment covering sensors blocks data collection. Sediment on lights dims illumination. Clearing this sediment requires maneuvering. But maneuvering uses battery power. And battery power is limited. The architecture of trenches also creates acoustic complications. Sonar pulses reflect off walls, floors, and ridges. A single pulse might generate multiple echoes. The machine receives overlapping signals. Software must interpret these signals correctly. It must distinguish between a nearby wall and a distant one. It must separate actual surfaces from artifacts created by reflection. This interpretation is not always accurate. Sometimes the software identifies a wall that does not exist. Sometimes it misses an obstacle directly ahead. Human operators monitoring the dive see the sonar data, but they cannot verify it visually. Cameras show only what the lights illuminate, and lights reach only a few meters. This creates situations where decisions must be made with incomplete information. Continue toward an uncertain target. Retreat to avoid potential collision. Adjust course based on questionable data. Every choice carries risk. Isolation and separation. Each trench exists in isolation. Unlike the abyssal plains that connect seamlessly across ocean basins, trenches are separated by thousands of kilometers. The Mariana Trench does not connect to the Tonga Trench. The Peru-Chile Trench lies far from the Japan Trench. Between them stretches ocean at lesser depths. 4,000 meters. 5,000 meters. Shallower in some places. For organisms adapted to Hadal pressure, these shallower regions become barriers. A creature evolved for 6,000 meters cannot survive at 4,000 meters. Not because 4,000 meters is shallow, but because the pressure is wrong. Their bodies are calibrated for higher compression. Their proteins stabilize under greater force. Their membranes function at specific pressure ranges. Moving to shallower water disrupts this calibration. Cells swell. Proteins unfold. Metabolic processes fail. The organism dies. This pressure barrier isolates populations. A species living in the Mariana Trench cannot migrate to another trench. It cannot disperse to new habitats. It remains confined to its original location. Over time, populations diverge. Random mutations accumulate. Environmental pressures select for different traits. Reproductive isolation prevents interbreeding. Eventually, separate species emerge. Scientists have documented this pattern repeatedly. Amphipods collected from different trenches show genetic differences. Fish species in one trench have no relatives in others. This isolation creates extraordinary diversity. Not diversity of forms visible from the surface, but diversity at the genetic and physiological level. Two amphipods might look similar, but their proteins differ chemically. Their enzymes function at different rates. Their membranes contain different lipid compositions. These differences reflect millions of years of independent evolution. Each trench becomes its own evolutionary experiment. But studying this diversity remains difficult. To compare species from different trenches, researchers must visit each location. They must collect samples. They must preserve those samples correctly. They must analyze them with equipment capable of detecting subtle differences. The logistics are demanding. A research ship might spend weeks traveling to a single trench. It might conduct only a handful of dives. It might collect samples from only a small area. Then it must return to port, process the samples, analyze the data, plan the next expedition. Years might pass between visits to the same trench. Decades might pass before a different trench is explored. During this time, the environment continues to change. Slowly by human standards, but consistently. Sediments accumulate. Organisms grow. Populations shift. The trench observed today may differ subtly from the trench observed 10 years ago. But without continuous monitoring, these changes go unnoticed. Researchers must piece together understanding from snapshots. Each snapshot separated by years. Each snapshot covering only a tiny fraction of the total environment. The picture that emerges remains incomplete. And the isolation of trenches ensures that it will remain incomplete for a long time. Energy and scarcity. Life in the Hadal zone operates under severe energy constraints. Near the surface, sunlight provides abundant energy. Photosynthesis converts light into chemical energy. This energy flows through food webs. Predators feed on herbivores. Herbivores feed on plants. Energy cascades from one level to the next. But sunlight does not reach the Hadal zone. All energy must come from above, either as organic particles drifting down, or as larger food falls. Organic particles are small, fragments of dead plankton, fecal matter from surface organisms, bits of decomposing material. These particles sink slowly. As they descend, organisms at intermediate depths consume them. By the time they reach 6,000 meters, most have been eaten or decomposed. Only a small fraction continues to the Hadal floor. This creates a perpetual state of scarcity. Organisms cannot rely on steady food supply. They must survive long periods with minimal intake, then exploit brief periods of abundance. Large food falls are rare but significant. When a whale dies near the surface, its body sinks. The carcass descends over days or weeks. Eventually, it reaches the seafloor. If it lands in a trench, it provides an enormous energy windfall. Scavengers detect the chemical signal. They converge from surrounding areas. Dozens, sometimes hundreds. They feed voraciously, tearing flesh, consuming fat and muscle, stripping the carcass to bone. This feeding frenzy might last weeks. During this time, the local community thrives. Populations swell. Reproduction increases. Growth accelerates. But eventually, the food disappears. The carcass is consumed completely. Only bones remain. And bones provide minimal nutrition. Scavengers disperse. They return to waiting. Metabolism slows again. Activity reduces. This cycle defines Hadal life. Long periods of scarcity interrupted by brief abundance. Organisms adapt accordingly. Many develop the ability to gorge when food appears. They consume far more than they immediately need. They store energy in specialized tissues. Fats provide dense energy storage. Some organisms accumulate lipids that account for significant body mass. These reserves sustain them during lean periods. Others develop extremely slow metabolisms. They reduce all non-essential processes. Movement becomes minimal. Growth nearly stops. Even cellular maintenance operates at reduced rates. This strategy extends survival time. But it also means recovery takes longer. An organism weakened by starvation cannot quickly regain strength. The scarcity also influences reproduction. Producing eggs or larvae requires energy. In an environment where energy is scarce, reproduction becomes costly. Some species reproduce continuously, but at low rates. Others wait for favorable conditions. A few might reproduce only once in a lifetime. The strategies vary, but all reflect the same constraint. Energy is limited. Every expenditure must provide sufficient benefit. This creates selection pressure for efficiency. Organisms that waste energy do not survive. Those that extract maximum value from minimal resources pass on their genes. Over generations, populations become increasingly efficient, streamlined, specialized, adapted to scarcity. But this specialization has consequences. Organisms tuned for Hadal conditions cannot easily adjust to different environments. They become dependent on specific pressure, temperature, and food availability. This dependence makes them vulnerable. If conditions change even slightly, they may not adapt quickly enough. If a food source disappears, they have no alternative. The Hadal zone supports life, but it supports life on a razor's edge, where every organism must balance perfectly between energy intake and expenditure, where miscalculation means death, where survival depends on strategy refined over millions of years, and where the margin for error remains vanishingly small. At Hadal depths, pressure is not a force acting on organisms. It is the medium in which they exist. Their cells have never known anything else. Their proteins fold in shapes that require compression. Their membranes maintain fluidity only under intense force. Remove the pressure, and these structures fail. This is not weakness. It is specialization. A Hadal amphipod functions perfectly in its environment. Its body chemistry operates at equilibrium with the surrounding water. Internal pressure matches external pressure. No gradient exists to create stress. The organism does not feel crushed. It feels normal. Its tissues contain molecules that prevent protein deformation. These molecules are called piezolites. They accumulate in cells specifically to stabilize structures under compression. Without piezolites, critical enzymes would distort. Metabolic pathways would break down. The organism would cease to function. But with them, life proceeds. Cell membranes also adjust. Under extreme pressure, typical membrane lipids become rigid. Too rigid to allow nutrients through. Too stiff for signals to pass. Hadal organisms modify their lipid composition. They incorporate molecules with specific shapes. These molecules maintain membrane flexibility despite compression. The adjustment is precise. Too much modification, and membranes become unstable. Too little, and they become impermeable. Evolution finds the exact balance. The result is a membrane that functions normally, at a pressure that would destroy standard biological materials. This adaptation extends to every system. Hadal fish lack swim bladders entirely. Gas-filled organs cannot exist at these depths. Any internal gas pocket would collapse instantly. Instead, they regulate buoyancy through other means. Lipid deposits provide lift. Specialized fluids balance density. Skeletal structures reduce or disappear. Bone contains rigid minerals that create stress under extreme pressure. Cartilage provides flexibility without the weight of calcified tissue. Many Hadal fish have cartilaginous skeletons, or greatly reduced bone structures. Their bodies remain flexible, compressible. This flexibility allows them to absorb pressure changes without damage. Even their muscles adapt. Muscle tissue contains proteins that contract and relax. Under pressure, these proteins can denature. They lose their shape and stop functioning. Hadal organisms produce stabilizing compounds that prevent this. Their muscles work efficiently despite conditions that would paralyze surface species. But the adaptation creates limitations. A Hadal fish brought to shallow water experiences rapid decompression. Internal pressure suddenly exceeds external pressure. Tissues expand. Membranes rupture. Proteins unfold. The organism dies within minutes, sometimes within seconds. Researchers attempting to study Hadal life face this constantly. They cannot observe organisms in their natural state. Bringing them to the surface destroys them. Keeping them at pressure requires complex equipment. Some research vessels carry pressure-retaining aquariums. These tanks maintain Hadal pressure after sample collection. Organisms inside remain alive. But the tanks are small. They can hold only a few specimens. And maintaining pressure for extended periods requires significant energy. Most research relies on preserved samples or on observations made by cameras at depth. Neither method provides complete information. Preserved samples lose their natural form. Chemical fixation changes tissue structure. Pressure release distorts bodies. Camera observations show behavior, but they cannot reveal internal chemistry. They cannot measure enzyme function or membrane composition. The gap between what researchers want to know and what they can actually measure remains wide. Movement through water. In the Hadal zone, movement is costly. Water at depth is dense, viscous, resistant to displacement. Every motion requires energy, and energy is scarce. Organisms adapt by minimizing movement. Many species are gelatinous. Their bodies contain high water content. This reduces density difference between body and surroundings. A gelatinous body moves through water more easily than a solid one. It requires less muscular effort. It consumes less energy. But gelatinous tissue is fragile. It offers minimal protection. It provides little structural support. These organisms survive because the Hadal zone is stable. No waves crash against them. No currents tumble them. Predators are few and move slowly. The stability allows fragility. Other organisms develop streamlined shapes. Amphipods have elongated bodies, smooth surfaces, limbs positioned to minimize drag. When they swim, they move efficiently. Each stroke propels them with minimal resistance. They glide between strokes rather than continuously swimming. This conserves energy. Fish at Hadal depths often have reduced fins, smaller tail fins, shortened pectoral fins. They do not need rapid acceleration. They do not chase prey over long distances. They wait. They position themselves. They strike when prey comes within range. Their muscles are adapted for brief, precise movements, not for sustained swimming. Many Hadal organisms remain stationary for extended periods. They settle on the seafloor. They burrow into sediment. They attach to rocks. From these positions, they wait for food to arrive. When a particle drifts past, they extend appendages. They capture it. They retract. The motion is small. The energy expenditure minimal. This strategy works because even small particles provide nutrition, and particles constantly drift in the water column. Slowly, steadily, organisms filter these particles without moving through water. The water moves past them. They simply harvest what passes by. Scavengers represent a different pattern. When a food fall occurs, they must reach it before competitors. This requires movement, sometimes sustained movement over considerable distance. They detect the chemical signal. They orient toward the source. They swim, but even this swimming is efficient. They do not rush. They pace themselves. The food will remain for days or weeks. There is no need for speed. What matters is reaching the food without exhausting energy reserves. Once they arrive, they feed until sated, or until the food disappears. Then they disperse again. Return to waiting. The cycle repeats. Sensing without seeing. Vision plays almost no role in Hadal life. Light does not exist there. Eyes become irrelevant. Most Hadal organisms either lack eyes or possess only rudimentary light-sensing organs. But they navigate effectively. They locate food. They find mates. They avoid predators. They accomplish this through other senses. Chemoreception is primary. Water carries dissolved chemicals. Organic matter releases compounds as it decomposes. Living organisms excrete waste products. Prey leaves chemical trails. Hadal organisms detect these chemicals with extraordinary sensitivity. Receptors on their bodies identify specific molecules, even in minute concentrations. A single molecule among billions of water molecules. The sensitivity seems impossible, but it is real. These organisms have evolved over millions of years in an environment where chemical sensing determines survival. Natural selection refines the ability continuously. They can distinguish between different chemical signatures. They recognize the scent of prey versus predator. They identify potential mates by chemical markers. This information guides behavior. An organism detecting prey chemicals moves toward the source. One detecting predator chemicals moves away. The response is automatic, instinctive. Mechanoreception provides additional information. Water transmits vibrations efficiently. Any movement creates pressure waves. These waves propagate through the environment. Organisms possess structures that detect these vibrations. Lateral line systems in fish. Sensory hairs on crustaceans. Specialized cells on body surfaces. These structures convert mechanical energy into neural signals. The organism perceives the vibration as a sensation. From this sensation, it extracts information. The frequency indicates size of the source. The intensity indicates distance. The direction becomes apparent through comparison between different receptors. A predator can detect a swimming prey organism several meters away. It tracks the vibrations. It closes the distance. It strikes without ever seeing the target. Prey organisms use the same sense. They detect approaching predators. They freeze. Movement stops. Vibrations cease. In absolute stillness, they become nearly undetectable. This creates a sensory arms race. Predators evolve greater sensitivity. Prey evolves better stillness. Predators develop ambush strategies. Prey develops evasive patterns. The interaction shapes both populations. Some organisms use electroreception. Muscle contractions generate weak electrical fields. Even the beating of a heart produces electrical activity. Certain Hadal species detect these fields. Electroreceptors on their bodies sense voltage gradients in water. The organism processes this information to locate prey. Even a completely still organism generates electrical activity. As long as its heart beats, as long as its muscles maintain tension. Electroreception reveals it. These combined senses create a rich sensory environment. To a Hadal organism, the water is not empty and dark. It is full of information. Chemical gradients form a scent landscape. Vibrations create an acoustic map. Electrical fields outline nearby life. The organism navigates this landscape as easily as a surface animal navigates using vision. Perhaps more easily, because these senses work equally well in darkness. They are not diminished by lack of light. They are optimized for the conditions that exist. Feeding strategies. Hadal organisms have developed feeding strategies that exploit every available resource. Some feed on suspended particles. They extend fine appendages into the water. These appendages act as filters. Water flows past. Particles catch on the filter. Periodically, the organism collects the trapped particles. It consumes them. It extends the appendages again. The process is continuous, slow, efficient. Other organisms feed on sediment. The seafloor contains organic material. Decomposed particles settle into mud. Microbes break down these particles further. Deposit feeders ingest sediment. They extract organic matter. They excrete the remaining mineral components. This strategy provides steady nutrition. Not abundant, but reliable. As long as sediment continues to accumulate, food remains available. Predators employ different tactics. Some are ambush hunters. They remain motionless, often buried partially in sediment. Only sensory appendages exposed. When prey approaches, they detect vibrations or chemicals. They wait until the prey is within striking range. Then they move rapidly. The strike is brief. A sudden lunge. Capture. Consumption. Then stillness returns. Other predators actively hunt. They move slowly through the environment. They use chemical and mechanical senses to locate prey. When they detect something, they investigate. If it is prey, they attack. If not, they continue searching. The hunting is methodical, not frantic. Energy conservation remains paramount. Scavengers represent the most opportunistic feeders. They consume whatever becomes available. Dead organisms, fecal matter, decomposing material. They lack specialization. They can digest a wide range of organic compounds. This flexibility allows them to exploit unpredictable food sources. When a large carcass arrives, scavengers gather quickly. They detect it through chemical plumes. The decaying flesh releases compounds that diffuse through water. Scavengers kilometers away receive the signal. They orient toward the source. They swim for hours or days. Eventually, they arrive. Dozens of individuals, sometimes hundreds. They feed together, not cooperatively, but simultaneously. Competition exists. Larger individuals dominate. Smaller ones feed on scraps. But the carcass is large enough to support many. The feeding continues until flesh is stripped. Then interest wanes. Most scavengers depart. A few remain. They consume tougher tissues. Cartilage, skin, connective tissue. Eventually, only bones remain. Specialized organisms colonize the bones. They extract remaining lipids. They consume marrow. This process takes years. Slowly, the carcass is reduced. Nutrients disperse into sediment. Microbes process the final remnants. The site becomes indistinguishable from surrounding seafloor. Until the next food fall. Reproduction in the abyss. Reproduction at Hadal depths operates under severe constraints. Finding mates is difficult. Organisms are widely dispersed. Visibility is zero. Movement is costly. Yet reproduction must occur. Populations must maintain themselves. Different species solve this problem differently. Some use broadcast spawning. Males release sperm into the water. Females release eggs. Fertilization occurs externally. This strategy does not require finding a mate. It only requires releasing gametes when others are nearby. Timing becomes critical. If an organism releases gametes at the wrong time, they disperse unfertilized. The energy invested is lost. Some species synchronize reproduction. Chemical signals coordinate release. When one individual spawns, others nearby detect the chemicals. They spawn in response. This increases fertilization success. But it requires sufficient population density. If organisms are too dispersed, the signal never reaches others. Other species rely on internal fertilization. This requires actual mating, which requires locating a partner. Chemical signals help. Females release pheromones. Males detect them. They follow the concentration gradient. Eventually, they reach the female. Mating occurs, but finding a mate might take weeks or months. During this time, the male cannot feed effectively. It focuses on reproduction. It exhausts energy reserves. After mating, it may die, having fulfilled its reproductive role. Some Hadal species exhibit extreme sexual dimorphism. Males are much smaller than females. They lack fully developed feeding structures. They exist primarily to mate. In some species, males attach to females permanently. They fuse with the female's body. They become parasitic. The female provides nutrition. The male provides sperm. This strategy ensures fertilization success. The female always has a mate available, but it requires males to sacrifice individual survival for reproductive function. Parental care is rare. Eggs are usually released into the water or deposited on the seafloor, then abandoned. No protection is provided. No resources are invested in offspring after release. Survival depends on chance. Most offspring die. Predation, starvation, unfavorable conditions. But a few survive, enough to maintain the population. This strategy minimizes parental energy investment. In an energy-limited environment, this efficiency matters. Some species produce fewer, larger eggs. These eggs contain more yolk. The developing embryo has more resources. It can grow larger before needing external food. This increases survival probability, but reduces the total number of offspring. The trade-off is evolutionary. Different species optimize differently based on their ecological niche. Larval stages pose challenges. Many Hadal organisms have planktonic larvae. These larvae drift in the water column. They feed on microscopic particles. Eventually, they settle to the seafloor. They metamorphose into adult form. But during the larval stage, they are vulnerable. Predation is high. Food may be scarce. Larvae that drift too far from suitable habitat die. Those that settle in poor locations die. Only larvae that successfully navigate development and settlement survive. The process is inefficient, but it works. Populations persist across generations. Genetic diversity is maintained. Evolution continues. Microbial foundations. The base of Hadal food webs is microbial. Bacteria and archaea dominate. They process organic matter. They cycle nutrients. They extract energy from chemical reactions. Without them, the Hadal ecosystem would collapse. These microbes inhabit every niche. They float in the water column. They coat rock surfaces. They permeate sediments. They colonize organic particles. Their diversity is extraordinary. Different species specialize in different processes. Some break down proteins. Others metabolize lipids. Some process carbohydrates. Each species occupies a specific chemical niche. Some microbes are aerobic. They require oxygen. They consume it while processing organic matter. Oxygen levels in Hadal water are typically adequate. Cold water holds more dissolved oxygen than warm water. And the water at depth originates from cold polar regions, where it absorbs oxygen before sinking. But in sediments, oxygen depletes quickly. Microbes consume it faster than it can diffuse downward. Below a few millimeters, sediments become anoxic. Anaerobic microbes thrive there. They use alternative electron acceptors. Sulfate, nitrate, iron compounds. These reactions release less energy than aerobic respiration, but they allow life to continue without oxygen. The metabolic byproducts of these reactions create chemical gradients. Sulfate reduction produces hydrogen sulfide. Denitrification releases nitrogen gas. Iron reduction generates soluble iron compounds. These chemicals diffuse through sediment. They create layers with distinct chemistry. Other microbes exploit these gradients. Sulfide-oxidizing bacteria live at the boundary between anoxic and oxic zones. They consume sulfide from below. They use oxygen from above. They extract energy from the chemical difference. This stratification creates complex microbial communities. Dozens of species coexist, each filling a specific role, each processing a specific compound. The community functions like a metabolic assembly line. One species breaks down complex molecules into simpler ones. Another species consumes those products. A third species processes the waste. Nutrients cycle through the system multiple times. Each passage extracts a little more energy. Eventually, compounds are broken down completely. Carbon dioxide, water, ammonia, sulfate. These simple molecules accumulate in sediment or dissolve in water. The process is slow, but relentless. Over years, microbes process enormous quantities of organic matter. They transform dead organisms into nutrients. Those nutrients support new microbial growth. Or they dissolve into water where they eventually rise, carried by slow deep-water currents, eventually returning to surface waters, where photosynthesis converts them back into living tissue. The cycle connects Hadal depths to surface productivity. Carbon that enters the ocean at the surface eventually sinks. Microbes at depth process it. Currents return it to the surface. This cycle takes centuries, but it operates continuously. The Hadal zone is not separate from the rest of the ocean. It is part of a global system. Microbes there play a crucial role. Without Hadal microbes, organic matter would accumulate. Nutrients would remain locked in inaccessible forms. the ocean's chemical balance would shift. Their presence ensures that the system remains dynamic. The role of pressure in chemistry. Pressure at Hadal depths affects chemical reactions. Reaction rates change. Equilibria shift. Some reactions that are unfavorable at the surface become favorable at depth. This creates unique chemistry. Water itself behaves differently. At high pressure, water molecules pack more tightly. The density increases slightly. The viscosity changes. This affects how substances dissolve. Some compounds become more soluble under pressure. Others become less soluble. Gases behave differently too. Most gases dissolve more readily in water under pressure. But at Hadal depths, gas bubbles cannot exist. The pressure would compress them instantly. Any gas must remain dissolved. This affects biological processes. Organisms cannot use gas exchange mechanisms that rely on bubbles. They cannot have gas-filled flotation organs. They must adapt to working with dissolved gases only. Enzymatic reactions respond to pressure. Enzymes are proteins that catalyze chemical reactions. Their shape determines their function. Pressure can distort that shape. Hadal organisms produce enzymes with pressure-adapted structures. The active site remains functional under compression. The protein maintains flexibility. Catalytic efficiency remains high. But these enzymes may not work well at lower pressure. Bring a Hadal organism to the surface, and its enzymes become less efficient. Reaction rates drop. Metabolism slows. The organism cannot compensate quickly. It dies before adaptation is possible. Chemical equilibria also shift under pressure. Consider the ionization of water. At the surface, water molecules dissociate into hydrogen and hydroxide ions at a specific rate. Under pressure, this equilibrium shifts. The pH of seawater changes slightly with depth. These pH changes affect biological systems. Proteins function within narrow pH ranges. Membranes remain stable only at specific pH values. Hadal organisms must maintain internal pH despite external changes. They use ion pumps. They produce buffering compounds. They regulate cellular chemistry actively. This requires energy, but it is necessary. Without pH regulation, cellular processes would fail. Mineral chemistry also changes under pressure. Some minerals precipitate more readily at depth. Others dissolve more easily. This affects geological processes. Rock surfaces in trenches develop coatings of precipitated minerals. These coatings protect underlying rock from erosion. But they also change surface chemistry. Microbes colonizing these surfaces encounter different chemical environments than they would on uncoated rock. They adapt accordingly. Pressure creates opportunities for life. Not in the sense that pressure is beneficial, but in the sense that pressure creates chemical conditions that some organisms can exploit. Metabolic pathways that are inefficient at the surface become viable at depth. Chemical reactions that release minimal energy become worthwhile when alternatives are absent. Evolution finds ways to use whatever resources exist. Pressure is one of those resources. Not directly, but through its effects on chemistry. Hadal organisms are shaped by these effects. Their biochemistry reflects millions of years of selection for pressure tolerance. Not merely tolerance, but optimization. They do not survive pressure. They require it. The descent no longer feels like movement. There is no sensation of arriving. No boundary announces itself. The floor appears gradually. Then it stops changing. Not because it is simple, but because there is nothing left to compare it to. The walls fade into distance. The slope levels out. The vehicle settles. Pressure remains constant. It no longer increases. It no longer reminds. It simply exists. Everything here exists within that pressure. Nothing resists it. Nothing escapes it. Life does not experience compression. It experiences balance. Internal and external forces meet and remain. The water does not flow in visible ways. There are no currents to follow. No direction implied by movement. Particles drift. Slowly. Individually. Each one falling at its own pace. They do not hurry. There is no reason to. The sediment below receives them. Silently. The surface smooths itself. Imprints soften. Edges blur. Time erases without effort. Nothing here is shaped quickly. Nothing here is sudden. Even disturbance feels temporary. A machine lands. Sediment lifts. A cloud forms. Then spreads. Then thins. Then disappears. Minutes pass. The seafloor returns to stillness. As if nothing happened. The pressure does not acknowledge interruption. Darkness does not respond to light. Life does not reorganize around visitors. It waits. It continues. The organisms here are not hidden. They are simply not revealed. Light exposes them briefly, then removes itself, and they resume exactly what they were doing before. No alarm. No change in behavior. No reaction beyond the moment. This place does not adapt to observation. It does not incorporate intrusion. It absorbs it, and then forgets. Time does not mark itself here. There are no cycles, no repeating signals, no reliable rhythm. Change happens, but without pattern. An organism feeds. Another passes. A microbe divides. These events do not build toward anything. They do not announce progression. They do not lead. They simply occur, then continue. The Hadal zone does not develop. It persists. Sediment layers accumulate, but without urgency. A millimeter over years. A meter over centuries. Each layer presses the one below. Gently, relentlessly. Nothing is crushed. Everything adjusts. Pressure distributes evenly. Balance is maintained. Life works within that balance, not against it. There is no struggle in the familiar sense. No chase. No expansion. No conquest. Energy moves slowly. Arrives infrequently. Is used carefully. A particle of organic matter drifts down. It is consumed. Broken apart. Processed. Passed on. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is rushed. Scarcity does not create panic here. It creates patience. Waiting is not passive. It is the primary state. Organisms wait because waiting costs less than searching. They wait because food eventually arrives. Not predictably, but reliably enough. Waiting is successful. Movement is selective, brief, purposeful. Then it ends. Stillness returns. Bodies remain where they are. No territory is defended. No space is claimed. Location matters only for efficiency, not ownership. Nothing here accumulates dominance. Nothing expands influence. Existence is localized, self-contained, limited by design. The chemistry continues. Quietly, microbes process what arrives. They convert complex material into simpler forms. Step by step. No step is dramatic. No step is final. Each reaction feeds another. Energy extracted gradually. Molecules transformed. Waste becomes resource. The process does not accelerate. It does not stall. It proceeds. Always. Even when nothing else appears to happen. This microbial activity is constant. Unnoticed. Unobserved. It defines the system more than any visible organism. But it does not announce itself. It does not demand recognition. It simply maintains continuity. Carbon moves. Nitrogen shifts. Sulfur cycles. Not upward. Not downward. Just through. The Hadal zone does not store history in monuments. It stores it in chemistry. Layers record time, not events. Pressure seals those layers, preserves them, but not for interpretation, only for existence. The record exists whether it is read or not. Machines come and go. Lights turn on. Cameras record. Sensors collect. Then everything leaves. The presence is brief, measured in hours. The environment measures in centuries. Nothing adjusts to accommodate curiosity. Nothing changes trajectory. The water closes. The darkness returns. The trench continues. Human exploration does not accumulate here. It does not leave trails. It does not build knowledge locally. All understanding exists elsewhere. At the surface. In data. In interpretation. Down here. Nothing remembers. The Hadal zone does not reject the surface. It simply does not interact with it. Connection exists, but it is diluted, filtered, broken into components. Surface life arrives here as particles, as remains, as chemistry. Identity dissolves. Function persists. The trench does not care where material originated, only that it can be processed. Pressure ensures uniformity. Darkness removes distinction. Scarcity removes excess. What remains is efficiency, balance, continuation. The organisms here do not know they are extreme. They do not experience themselves as adapted. They simply exist in conditions that never change. Their biology is not impressive to them. It is sufficient. Their environment does not challenge them. It defines them. Remove the environment. They fail. But within it, they are complete. No stress response activates. No compensation is required. Everything functions as intended. Here, there is no incentive to innovate. No advantage in speed. No benefit to size. Survival is not competitive. It is conditional. Meet the conditions. Persist. Fail to meet them. And that simplicity is deceptive. It hides complexity, but it does not highlight it. Nothing seeks attention. Even death is quiet. An organism stops moving. Chemistry takes over. Microbes arrive. The body dissolves. Energy redistributes. No marker remains. No boundary indicates loss. The system absorbs it. The Hadal zone does not mourn. It does not remember individuals. It does not accumulate narrative. It does not move toward future states. It remains. This is not emptiness. It is density without motion, presence without expression, a complete environment with no interest in explanation. Observation slows here, not because there is nothing to see, but because seeing stops providing structure. There is no focal point, no climax, no transition. Everything is already where it will remain. The longer one observes, the less there is to interpret. Patterns dissolve. Expectation fades. Eventually, only existence remains. Pressure, darkness, cold, life, not separate, not interacting dramatically, just coexisting, fully. This depth does not feel hostile. It does not feel welcoming. Those are surface interpretations. Here, those concepts have no application. There is no invitation, no barrier, just conditions, met perfectly by what exists. The trenches do not feel unfinished. They do not feel incomplete. They feel settled, as if nothing else is expected, as if nothing else is missing. The Hadal zone does not suggest mystery. Mystery implies potential resolution. This place offers none. It does not hide answers. It exists without questions. Human curiosity passes through briefly, then leaves. The environment remains unchanged. Even now, as observation continues, nothing builds, nothing escalates, nothing concludes. The descent has ended, not with arrival, but with cessation. There is nowhere deeper to go, and nowhere else to be. This is only one of many hidden environments shaped by isolation. Beneath Antarctica's ice, others exist that remain sealed away. In the next film, the journey continues toward the lakes hidden beneath Antarctica's ice. A world separated from the surface for far longer than the ocean below the shelves. The water remains still. Pressure remains constant. Life continues, without witness, without urgency, without resolution. And the depth holds, unchanged.